I used to believe the house you grow up in imprints something permanent on you, a quiet instruction whispered beneath your skin about what love is supposed to feel like. But on the December afternoon when my mother told me my children were not welcome at Christmas, something old and buried shifted inside me, breaking open a truth I had avoided for years. I was standing in my small kitchen, frosting cupcakes with Emma, while Noah chased a toy dinosaur through a forest of scattered crayons, when my phone buzzed with my mother's name. I wiped my hands, smiled, and answered, expecting holiday chatter. Instead, Marilyn's voice came sharp and rehearsed, almost like she had practiced it in the mirror. She told me Logan was bringing his new girlfriend to meet the family, and because Sienna wanted everything to look perfect, my kids couldn't come. They'd ruin the image, she said, as if Emma's crooked paper stars and Noah's sticky fingerprints were threats to national security. I whispered that I understood, even though every part of me recoiled, and when I hung up, my hands shook so hard the frosting knife trembled against the counter. That night, sleep stayed far from me. I lay on the couch staring at the faint glow of mismatched Christmas lights. Emma insisted on keeping lit, replaying the sentence that lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Your kids would ruin the perfect image. Around 1 a.m., I wandered through the apartment, taking in the ornaments Emma had clustered at her height, the craft projects Noah taped to the walls, the toy dinosaurs camped on the blankets. Standing there in the quiet glow, I felt something warm bloom in my chest, something that told me this imperfect apartment held more truth than any curated family portrait my parents had ever staged. I had grown up in a world of forced smiles and immaculate surfaces where Marilyn cared more about photographs than feelings, more about perfection than comfort. Suddenly, I understood she wasn't just asking me to leave my kids at home. She was asking me to pass that same cold legacy on to them, and I couldn't. By morning, exhaustion draped over me like a heavy coat, but a strange calm lived beneath it, right up until the doorbell rang like someone was trying to break it. When I opened the door, the entire Caldwell clan stood there, furious and shivering in the winter air. Logan's new girlfriend, Sienna, looked me up and down with cool disinterest before letting her gaze wander past me into the apartment. Her blonde ponytail was tight, her beige coat immaculate, and her expression the exact shade of judgment I remembered from high school Mean Girls.
"So you're Maya,"
she said, her smile too sweet to be sincere. The messy one in the family. She let her eyes glide across the toys, the crayons, the lived-in chaos, then added, "Oh, this explains the aesthetic problem." The words were sugar-coated, but sharp enough to slice through whatever calm I had left. Marilyn pushed past me without waiting for permission, sighing as if the sight of my life personally offended her. Gerald followed, rubbing his temples as though my living room was giving him a migraine. Logan jumped straight into explanations about branding and cohesion, describing their Christmas photo shoot like it was a corporate launch. Sienna chimed in about sponsorships, photographers, and maintaining a clean visual identity, while my mother summarized it all with her familiar tone of superiority as she told me that my situation might overshadow everything they were trying to build. And in that moment, standing barefoot in my own doorway while they dissected my children like inconvenient props, I felt something inside me begin to harden into clarity. I stared at them, unable to fully grasp how casually they dismissed the two little souls asleep in the next room. When I finally managed to speak, my voice sounded calmer than I felt as I asked whether they truly believed Emma and Noah didn't fit their aesthetic. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch, and when Marilyn finally said, "Your kids are unpredictable, sweetheart," loud, they could ruin the atmosphere, it felt like she had reached into my chest and squeezed. Sienna scrolled her phone, barely pretending to be polite, and added that children grabbed things, smudged frosting, and cried at random, then concluded, "It's just not the look we're going for." Logan rolled his eyes and said I wouldn't understand because I'd been stuck, while he and Sienna were building something. It sounded absurd, almost laughable, that the cost of their curated Christmas was my children's existence. But it wasn't until Marilyn tilted her head and said, For once in your life, stop being difficult and fall in line, that something steady and fierce rose in me. That sentence echoed every unspoken rule of my childhood, every guilt trip, every time I'd been expected to swallow discomfort to keep the family running smoothly. I looked her straight in the eye and said I wasn't doing this. My refusal hung in the air like a scent no one recognized, until Marilyn clutched her hands dramatically and declared I had made her feel terrible, as though she were the victim of my boundaries. Gerald muttered about compromise. Logan insisted it was only one Christmas, and Sienna offered a kid-friendly day after New Year's, low stakes and low importance, while Marilyn revealed the real reason they had come. They needed financial help. Hosting was expensive, she said, and they'd appreciate a little support. When I asked how much, she claimed I was being crass, then named the amount anyway, $2,000. Logan lifted his chin proudly, and Sienna smiled at her phone like this was all perfectly reasonable. Before I could reply, Noah shuffled into the hallway with his stuffed triceratops, rubbing his eyes as he whispered, "Mommy, pancakes." His small voice cut through the room like a bell. Sienna's smile faltered, barely, and I stepped in front of him to shield him from their expressions before sending him back toward the kitchen. When I faced my family again, my calm had solidified into steel. I told them I would think about it, and Marilyn immediately pressed that today would be best because they had deposits. Gerald spoke about family support, and I nodded as if absorbing their words. Then, without raising my voice or showing any anger, I slowly closed the door in their faces. The latch clicked like the end of a chapter I didn't know I'd been writing. Inside, the quiet felt foreign. Emma hummed softly from the living room while Noah clattered dishes in the kitchen, creating the soundtrack of my actual life. Messy, loud, real. My phone buzzed with messages from the family group chat that Marilyn had renamed Caldwell Immediate, the day I paid Gerald's overdue tax bill. They demanded answers, deadlines, payments. Instead of replying, I scrolled through the folder I called Receipts, a collection of screenshots I kept not out of spite, but survival. Every bill I'd covered, every subscription tied to my card, every emergency I'd solved without thanks. I sent 12 images into the chat, a collage of truth. They responded with disbelief, excuses, and insults, but for the first time, their reactions didn't shake me. I typed slowly, telling them the changes that were coming. The phone plan, the passwords, the streaming accounts, the business card. When I hit send, a quiet sense of ownership settled inside me. Then the doorbell rang again, hard, impatient, demanding, and I felt myself step into a version of me I had been afraid to meet, but finally recognized as the one I should have been all along. When I opened the door, the winter air rushed past me, sharp enough to sting my eyes, but nowhere near as cold as the expressions gathered on my front step. Marilyn stood rigid, her voice clipped as she declared my behavior unacceptable, speaking as though I were an unruly teenager rather than a grown woman defending her children. Gerald folded his arms and insisted I apologize, though he could not quite articulate for what. Logan accused me of blowing things up, explaining yet again that he and Sienna had a real opportunity through their brand partnership. And Sienna, with her immaculate beige coat and perfectly glossed lips, stepped forward to calmly explain that my children were simply too distracting for their content. I felt something inside me twist at the ease with which she dismissed Emma and Noah's entire existence. When I answered that children are distracting because they are human, she countered without hesitation. Not for our content. Before I could respond, a soft voice whispered behind me. Emma stood clutching a paintbrush dusted with red glitter, her small face pale with confusion. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" she asked, her voice trembling at the edges. Marilyn's eyes widened with embarrassment, clearly annoyed that the scene she hoped to control now had an unintended witness. I knelt beside Emma and told her she had done nothing wrong, but inside I felt a deep primal roar unfurling. I stood again and asked Marilyn what exactly she had told my daughter. She stumbled over excuses before admitting she had described the kids as overwhelming, as if the word were gentle. Sienna sighed impatiently, and Gerald snapped that if I didn't calm down, they would leave. "Then leave," I said, not loudly or dramatically, but with a firmness that startled even me. Marilyn gasped, calling me disrespectful, while I finally let the truth spill out, explaining how dare they walk into my home and call my children problems. How dare they ask me for $2,000 while treating my kids as clutter. Logan muttered that I was acting unhinged, and I replied that he was acting entitled. He stepped forward, furious, insisting I was destroying Christmas over a vibe, and I answered with a clarity that settled into my bones. I wasn't destroying anything. I was ending a pattern. I pointed toward the hallway where Emma and Noah stood watching, their eyes wide and uncertain, and I said that if my children weren't welcome, then neither was I. If they were considered too messy, too loud, too real for the perfect picture my family wanted to paint, then I would choose them every single time. Marilyn warned that I would regret this, and I told her the only thing I regretted was how long I had stayed quiet. Then I closed the door, not angrily, not dramatically, but with a slow finality that felt like placing the last piece of a puzzle into its rightful place. The apartment exhaled with me, warm and imperfect and full of life. Inside the kitchen, Noah hummed a dinosaur song he had invented, and Emma began sweeping glitter into a crooked pile. They were watching me, trying to understand whether they had somehow caused all of this. I forced a smile and asked who wanted pancakes, and Noah cheered so loudly he startled the cat next door. We cooked together in a symphony of flour, sticky fingers, and contagious laughter, crafting lopsided pancakes that tasted like relief. Later, while we built a blanket fort, my phone buzzed again with messages from my parents claiming their phones weren't working. Confused, I called the provider, and the representative, Jordan, explained calmly that someone had attempted to upgrade a phone using my account at 3 a.m. The shipping address matched Logan's apartment. I canceled the order immediately. When I sent the screenshot into the group chat, Logan responded with a vomiting emoji. Marilyn insisted I was being petty. Gerald claimed they raised me better, but I muted the chat and let the silence return. For the first time in years, it felt like mine. The afternoon moved gently after that, carrying the quiet kind of peace that settles only when a storm begins to pass. Around 3 p.m., there was another knock at the door, this one soft, almost apologetic. When I opened it, Aunt Rosa stood on the landing holding a small paper bag, her expression warm but tinged with worry. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, announcing that she had told Marilyn she was out of line. Emma and Noah lit up instantly, running to her as if she carried sunlight. She handed each of them a gingerbread cookie and whispered conspiratorially that they were store-bought, which made them giggle as though she had confessed a grand secret. For the first time in days, I actually laughed, the sound surprising me with how light it felt. Rosa squeezed my arm and said quietly, "You're doing the right thing. Your mother's not hurt. She's simply furious she lost control." Her words were so steady, so certain, that I felt my eyes sting. She stayed nearly an hour, making crafts with the kids, telling old stories, and never once asking me to justify my choices. When she finally left, she looked back with a softness that felt like permission to keep choosing myself. That night, after Emma and Noah fell asleep tangled together beneath blankets and glitter-speckled drawings, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a fresh notebook. The apartment glowed with the dim warmth of our crooked Christmas lights, and for the first time in a long while, the glow felt like it belonged to me. I began with the tangibles, a new business bank account, transferring every dollar out of the old one, closing the credit card Logan was so fond of accidentally charging. I froze my credit and removed everyone from the phone plan. Marilyn texted that they couldn't figure it out. Gerald sent that they were too old to understand these things. I replied that they absolutely could, and when neither responded, I felt a small, defiant satisfaction settle in my chest. Then I gathered everything that had ever been borrowed and never returned, The ring light I had bought for Marilyn's baking live streams, the spare tablet Logan said he just needed for a weekend, Sienna's tripod she forgot after brunch. I placed it all in a large trash bag, drove it to my parents' porch, and left it there with a note that simply read, "Returning your things. Please return my peace." It wasn't written in anger but in closure. When I returned home, I created a private folder on my laptop titled Clarity, filled with every screenshot, message, and proof of the patterns I had endured. Not for revenge, not for evidence, just for understanding. As I finished, I sat back and let the quiet of the apartment settle over me. The tree lights blinked unevenly, the stockings slouched to one side, and the paper snowflakes Emma had cut looked more like amoebas than winter decorations. Yet the scene felt perfectly ours, untouched by anyone's expectations. For the first time in years, Christmas wasn't a performance. It was simply a moment to breathe. When morning arrived, soft and pale, Emma shook me awake, whispering urgently that it was snowing. It wasn't much, just a thin drift of flakes melting on the pavement, but to her and Noah it was magic. We flew outside in pajamas and mismatched boots, laughing as Noah declared that snowflakes tasted like toothpaste. We made slightly burnt cinnamon rolls and opened presents at our own pace. I took only 2 photos, not for posting, not for proving anything, but just to keep for us. And as we sat surrounded by torn paper and warm blankets, a quiet realization washed over me. I didn't miss my family. I missed the version of them I used to hope they could be. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Sienna. She admitted she hadn't known about the years of financial requests, confessed she shouldn't have commented on my home, and said she was rethinking some things. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, which in its own way felt like a small turning point. I typed back only 3 words: "Good, so am I." 2 days later, Marilyn sent a message suggesting Sunday dinner so we could talk this out, followed almost immediately by Gerald's attempt to soften it by saying she missed the kids. I stared at the texts for a long moment, weighing the distance between who I used to be and the person I was finally becoming. Then I replied with a single condition. We would come for 1 hour, and if anyone mentioned image or money, we would leave. No explanations, no apologies, just the rule. Gerald responded with a simple "fine," as if negotiating with me were a foreign experience he hadn't yet learned to navigate. We arrived at exactly 3 p.m. Marilyn greeted us with a smile pulled so tight it quivered at the edges, the kind of smile that said she had rehearsed every word she intended to say and feared the script might slip from her grasp. I stood there waiting, not hostile, not eager, simply present in a way she wasn't used to. To my surprise, she knelt down to Emma and Noah and said, in a quiet voice void of excuses, "I made a mistake, not you, me." No justifications, no stage cues, no dramatic sighs. Just the sentence she owed them. The kids forgave her instantly because children rarely cling to grudges. They cling to the truth of how they are treated in the moment. Marilyn straightened, caught between relief and uncertainty, and for the first time I saw her not as the immovable force of my childhood, but as a woman terrified of losing the daughters and grandchildren she had taken for granted. The hour passed gently. We ate slightly dry cookies and politely endured stories from Gerald about a neighborhood dispute involving holiday lights. Sienna and Logan were absent, each offering excuses that felt thin but unnecessary. I watched Marilyn hover near me, trying not to meddle as she usually did, catching herself each time she felt the urge to steer the conversation or ask about financial plans. She was trying, imperfectly, awkwardly, but truly trying, and I recognized that attempt as something fragile that could grow only if handled with boundaries rather than fear. When she finally began to slip, hinting at future vacations and family coordination, I simply stood, smiled, and told her we were heading out. No tension, no guilt, no dramatic ending, just a quiet demonstration of the new rules. That night, once the kids were tucked beneath soft blankets and drifting toward sleep, I opened the kitchen cabinet where I had taped a small handwritten list the night everything broke. The paper had curled slightly at the edges, but the words remained steady. I don't pay to be treated badly. My kids are not negotiable. No is a complete sentence. Family is a verb. I read them softly to myself, almost like a prayer, realizing that for the first time these weren't aspirations, they were truths I now lived. When I tucked Emma in, she looked at me with those deep, thoughtful eyes of hers and asked, "Mom, what's the moral of Christmas this year?" She always asked that as if our life were a story, and I were the one narrating its meaning. I thought of beige tablescapes, brand deals, frantic knocks, and 2 children who made the world glow through crooked stars and glittery chaos. I brushed a curl from her forehead and whispered, "The moral is that love isn't a filter. It's messy, loud, real, and it never asks you to make yourself smaller to fit someone else's picture." She nodded solemnly, then announced she was keeping our paper chain decorations up until March. "Deal," I said, and as I turned off the light, I stood for a moment in the doorway, letting the peace of our imperfect home settle around me. It struck me then that this Christmas was the year I finally chose us, and in doing so, I lost absolutely nothing worth keeping. And maybe that's the quiet lesson we spend adulthood learning, that real family isn't measured by curated images or spotless surfaces, but by the people who allow you to grow, breathe, and take up space without apology. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is close one door and realize the world on your side of it is exactly where you belong. If this story resonated with you, please remember to like the video, share it with someone who might need it, subscribe for more stories, and tell me in the comments what part spoke to you the most.